I was halfway through a boring night shift when the call came in, the kind of call that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up before your brain even catches up to why. The dispatcher patched through to my cruiser with a little crackle and said, "Unit 12, we've got a disturbance at St. Augustine Medical Center. Caller reports screaming and a possible assault in progress." And my first thought was that she'd read the address wrong because St. Augustine had been closed for 15 years, ever since the fire. But then she added, "The caller identified herself as Nurse Valerie on night rotation." Sounds panicked, line cut out, and I remember staring at the glowing green letters on my dash, at the timestamp 2:13 a.m., and feeling my stomach drop because I'd heard that name before in one of the old case files we used back at the academy, the ones they pulled out to scare rookies about what real evil looks like. I told dispatch I was en route and hit the lights, the empty streets flashing blue and red as I headed toward the hulking shape of the hospital on the hill. That big concrete coffin everyone in town pretended not to see. Wind shoved against the cruiser and the clouds were low and heavy, folding over the building like they were trying to bury it. And as I pulled into the cracked, overgrown parking lot, I noticed two things at once. The main entrance lights were on, bright white against the dark, and my radio, clear a second ago, suddenly erupted in static that sounded too much like whispering dispatch. "This is 12. I'm at St. Augustine," I said, but my words were swallowed by the interference. Instead of her voice, I got this faint, looping phrase, like an old recording. "Code black in the basement. Code black in the basement. Security. Respond." Over and over, layered under the static like someone had spliced a tape straight into my headset. I killed the engine and stepped out, the air here colder than it had any right to be, breath fogging in front of me. The hospital loomed up. Rows of dark windows, and at the center, a lit entrance that shouldn't have had power. The glass doors slightly open as if someone had just slipped through. I remember thinking this had to be some sick prank. Maybe kids using portable generators and a projector, but my hand still landed on my holster, thumb unsnapping the retention strap as I approached. My boots crunched glass and gravel, every sound too loud against the strange, muffled quiet, like the whole hill was holding its breath. As I neared the doors, the motion sensor above them clicked, and the glass slid wider with a soft hiss. Lights blooming on in the lobby inside, bright and sterile and wrong, in a building that was supposed to be gutted and dark. The smell hit me next, that faint mix of disinfectant and something sweet and rotten buried underneath, a ghost of old sickness. "Police!" I called, stepping into the lobby, the word bouncing back at me from empty walls. The reception desk was still there, computer monitor on, a half-filled sign-in sheet on a clipboard, a plastic cup of coffee gone cold and skin thick on the surface, but there was a layer of dust over everything that told me no one had actually sat here in years. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, a distant alarm beeped twice, then stopped, like a heartbeat, skipping, and I felt that first little hook of fear grab behind my ribs. "If this is a prank, it's a serious charge," I said, more for myself than anyone else, and moved toward the hallway that led to the main wards. As soon as my foot crossed from the lobby tile to the corridor linoleum, the overhead lights flickered hard enough to make my shadow jump. A second later, half of them went dead, plunging the hallway into a patchwork of light and dark, like someone had taken a knife to the power grid. My radio crackled again, the same phrase looping. coat black, in the basement. But this time another voice bled in underneath. A woman, high and choked with fear. "Please, he's awake in the lower wing. We can't sedate him. Send someone armed, he's—" And then a sound like the handset being ripped away and the call sliced off. "Nurse Valerie," I said under my breath, because I recognized the name from the old fire report. She'd been listed among the dead, found in the basement ward with her throat cut. Logic lined up in my head like suspects in a lineup. Old recordings on a timer, kids with tech, maybe some urban explorer with a dark sense of humor, and I marched forward, clinging to that because the alternative was that time in this place was wrong, stitched together badly and starting to come apart. A wheelchair sat abandoned in the middle of the corridor, one wheel slowly turning though there was no draft. As I passed it, the wheel squeaked to a stop on its own. And in the silence that followed I heard another sound, faint but distinct, the soft rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. It was coming from the ICU. I knew the layout from the blueprints they'd shown us once during a hazard training, back when the city was still pretending it might renovate this place. The ICU was to the left, through a set of double doors with wired glass windows. And as I approached, I saw light flickering behind them like a TV in a dark room I pushed through, gone out now. My other hand sweeping my flashlight across the room and froze. Every bed in the ICU was occupied. Patients lay in rows, hooked up to monitors that beeped and traced green lines of heartbeats, ventilators sighing, IV bags dripping. Some patients were wrapped in bandages, some had intubation tubes, some had restraints on their wrists and ankles. The leather dark with the age. The air was thick with that hospital smell, but heavier, metallic, like old blood. The logical part of my brain slammed against the scene like a bird hitting glass. This ward had been emptied the week of the fire. There shouldn't be anyone here, but my eyes insisted this was real. I could see the condensation on the inside of the ventilator tubes, the faint rise and fall of chests. "Police," I called again, voice catching. "If anyone can hear me, say something." And that was when all the monitors flatlined at once. The beeping turned into one long, continuous tone that drilled into my head, green lines shooting up then flattening to nothing. At the same time, every ventilator cut out, the sighing noise replaced by a thick, suffocating silence, and I watched, helpless, as 30-odd chests slowly stopped moving. My throat closed, fight or flight punching the back of my skull, and I backed toward the doors, some primitive part of me sure that if I stayed, those bodies would all sit up in unison and turn their heads toward me. The overhead lights flickered again, then died completely, plunging the IQ into darkness lit only by the dim emergency strips along the floor. In that reddish glow, I saw something move near the far bed, a tall shape bending over a patient, hands working with calm, methodical precision, as if adjusting a tube. "Hey," I snapped, relief and fear tangling in my chest. An actual person, maybe the source of this nightmare. "Step away from the bed and show me your hands." The figure straightened, slowly, too slowly, like each vertebra in its spine had to remember how to move, and turned toward me. At first, all I saw was the outline, tall, in a long coat or maybe a doctor's gown, shoulders narrow but wrong, head tilted at an angle that made my neck ache just to look at it. Then my flashlight caught its face and my brain recoiled. It was wearing a surgical mask, but the mask was soaked through in the center with something dark, sagging against a mouth that seemed too wide. Above it, the eyes were covered by the reflective surface of cracked safety goggles, and behind the crack something moved, like insects trapped in resin. It took one step toward me, and the continuous tone of the flat lines rose in pitch. It was subtle, but it was there, like the hospital itself was holding its breath with it. I don't remember deciding to fire. My finger was just suddenly squeezing, the report of the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The figure snapped backward with an impact that should have dropped any human being, but instead it just flowed, its upper body bending sideways, absorbing the force like water. Then it snapped upright again and took another step. I stumbled back through the ICU doors and into the corridor, slamming them shut and shoving a rolling cart in front of them. The flat-line tone cut off abruptly, leaving my ears ringing, and all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the faint, regular ding of the elevator at the end of the hall. Ding. Door open. Ding. Door close. Ding. Get it together, Reed, I muttered, trying to steady my hands. I'd been a cop for 8 years. I'd seen shootings, car wrecks, overdoses, things that kept you awake at night, but nothing that bent the rules of physics like this. I latched onto training, to procedure like a lifeline. Secure the scene, locate the caller, assess threats. The elevator dinged again, doors sliding open, and this time they stayed open. From where I stood, I could see the interior, lit up, the digital panel glowing red with a single letter, B, basement. The radio on my shoulder hissed and popped, and then a voice came through, clear as if they were standing next to me. Unit 12, respond. Code black, in the basement. Officer down. A male voice, urgent. Then, Daniel, if you can hear me, don't let him get out. And my blood turned to ice, because no one on the force called me Daniel on dispatch. They used last names, and the voice, it sounded like my father's. My dad had been a security guard at St. Augustine when I was a kid. He died when I was 17. Car accident on a wet road, a story I'd wrapped in cotton and stored on a high shelf in my mind. But now, hearing that voice echo down a corridor lined with flickering lights, something rotten and half-remembered stirred beneath the cotton. For a moment I stood there, torn between the urge to sprint back to my cruiser and the pull of that elevator, of that single glowing bee. And in the end, the part of me that had put on the badge won. I stepped into the elevator. The door slid shut behind me with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the panel blinked, the B button already lit, as if someone had pressed it a moment before I arrived. Just as the elevator shuddered and started moving, the lights flickered and the emergency speaker crackled on. A woman's voice, warped like it was underwater, whispered, "You heard us once before and you didn't come. Will you come this time? Who is this?" I demanded, but the speaker only hissed. The elevator ride seemed too long for a single floor. The numbers above the door cycled erratically, 13250, before finally landing on B. When the doors opened, the first thing that hit me was the smell, damp and metallic, like an old cellar full of rusting tools and wet stone. The basement corridor stretched in both directions, lit only by the occasional bare bulb. Pipes ran along the ceiling, sweating, dripping in slow, deliberate taps. There were doorways spaced along the walls, some with peeling numbers, some with no labels at all. My radio clicked again, and a recorded overhead announcement bled through. That bland hospital voice you hear while waiting for test results. Attention staff, code black in the lower isolation ward. Repeat, code black in the lower isolation ward. All available security respond. And behind it, faintly, a man screaming. I moved cautiously, sweeping my light across each door. Some were chained shut, some hung half open, revealing empty storage rooms, old gurneys, stacks of broken equipment. I was starting to think this was just going to be a tour of a forgotten crypt when I passed a door with a faded sign. Lower isolation. The lock had been broken, twisted metal dangling like a broken arm. My flashlight beam slid over deep scratches around the doorknob, like something with a lot of time and a lot of patience had clawed at it. My heart hammered, but I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hallway beyond was narrower, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. I could see doors on either side with little glass windows covered by sliding metal panels. Most of the panels were shut, but about halfway down one was open, a crack, just enough for something to peer through. "Police," I said again, my voice sounding small. "If anyone's here and needs help, call out." And then, almost against my will, I added, "Valerie?" The reply was immediate, and it came from everywhere at once. A chorus of whispers rose, layers of voices stacked on top of each other, urgent and overlapping. "Help us! He's coming! Don't open the door! Please open the door! He lies! Fire! He likes the fire!" And over them all a low humming laugh that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. "Quiet!" I yelled, and the sound cut off like someone had pressed mute, leaving only the dripping pipes and my own pulse roaring in my ears. One of the cell doors rattled. I swung my beam toward it. The window panel was still shut, but something on the other side scraped against it with slow, deliberate movements, like fingers testing the thickness of the metal. A small voice came through, a child's, thin and hoarse. "Is someone really there, or is it him again?" That voice sliced straight through my defenses. I'd dealt with abused kids before, seen the empty way they looked at adults, and something paternal and furious surged up in me. "I'm Officer Reed," I said, stepping closer, shining my light on the door. A flaking label near the handle read, "Room 12B," and beneath it, on a plastic slider, a name was barely visible. "Patient, Emily Harper." "I'm real," I continued, forcing my voice steady. "I'm here to get you out." "He says that too," the girl whispered, "but he always smells like matches and metal. You don't." Behind me, down the hall, something heavy dragged across the floor, a slow scraping sound that got closer with each heartbeat. My survival instincts screamed at me to move, but I couldn't leave a kid locked in a cell, not even in hell. "Where's the key, Emily?" I asked. "Security room," she said instantly. "He keeps them in the box with the glass that screams." I knew what she meant. One of those wall-mounted emergency boxes where you break the glass to access. Equipment, but I didn't see any around me. The scraping sound was nearer now, accompanied by a faint humming, the same tune that had bled through the whispers. It sounded like someone humming along to elevator music with all the wrong notes. I backed toward the entrance of the ward, sweeping my light around until it caught on a red box mounted near the corner. The glass was dusty, but I could see the outline of keys hanging inside, dozens of them glinting like teeth. The scraping stopped. The humming continued, closer than before, and then a voice, that same watery PA voice, but without the speaker's filter, drifted down the hall. "Security to lower isolation. You are late, very late, but we forgive you. We always forgive you because you always come back, Danny. My father had called me Danny, no one else. My hand shook as I raised the butt of my gun and smashed the glass. The sound exploded in the confined space, and for a heartbeat everything was still. Then a hairline crack snaked across the fluorescent tube overhead, and it popped, showering sparks. In those strobing flashes I saw him. He stood at the far end of the hall, tall and thin in a scorched lab coat. Head cocked, surgical mask hanging loose around his neck. His skin was pale and tight, stretched over bone, and where his eyes should have been, there were just shiny wet pits, as if someone had scooped them out and left them to fill with something dark. "You were supposed to die upstairs," he said, voice echoing off the walls. "In the ICU with the others. You always ruin my work, Daniel, just like your father." I grabbed the keys, metal biting into my palm, and sprinted back to Emily's door. My light swung wildly, throwing warped shadows of the doctor, if that's what he was, across the walls as he began to move. That same liquid, boneless step I'd seen in the ICU. Finding the right key in a bunch in the dark, while something inhuman walks toward you, should be impossible. But adrenaline sharpened everything. My fingers found one marked 12B and jammed it into the lock, twisting. The door resisted for a second, and then gave with a shriek. Inside, curled on a thin mattress, was a girl of maybe 10. Knees hugged to her chest, hospital bracelet hanging loose on her wrist. Her eyes were huge in the flashlight beam, dark and sunken, but there was a glimmer of hope in them that hurt to look at. "Come on," I said, grabbing her hand. "We're getting out of here." Behind me, the doctor's humming grew louder. "You won't make it this time," he crooned almost gently. "You never do. But it's such fun watching you try." Emily's fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. "Don't look at him," she whispered. "He's made of all the times they screamed. If you look too long, the noise gets inside your head and never stops." We ran. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching like taffy, doors multiplying, numbers repeating. My sense of direction went to hell, but somehow my feet found the way back to the main basement corridor, the peeling lower isolation sign swinging overhead as we burst through. For a second, I thought we were clear. Then every door in the corridor slammed open at once. Figures lurched out, patients in gowns, nurses, orderlies, shapes in street clothes, faces burned, bandaged, or missing altogether. They didn't move like living people, didn't stagger or lunge. They simply appeared closer each time I blinked, like bad frames in a film, their mouths opening in silent screams. Emily squeezed my hand and pulled me toward a side door marked "Maintenance." We shoved through, slamming it behind us, and I heard their hands hit the other side, palms smacking wood in a frantic applause. The maintenance stairwell was narrow and steep, concrete steps slick with condensation. Faint light bled down from above, and for the first time since I'd entered the building, I felt something like a path upward. A way out, halfway up, the building shuddered. It was subtle at first, like distant thunder, then stronger. Dust sifted down from the ceiling and a low, continuous alarm started somewhere above us, different from the ICU tones, more primal, the kind of alarm you never want to hear in a place full of oxygen tanks and sick people. The fire alarm. "It's happening again," Emily panted, struggling to keep up. "He's lighting it again. He always lights it again when you come." What?" I gasped. But there was no time for questions. Smoke was already beginning to curl down the stairwell, thin and black, smelling of burning plastic and something else under it, something like cooked meat. We burst out onto the ground floor into a corridor I recognized from photos in the old reports. This had been the main surgical wing, the place where the fire had started. Now it was divided between then and now half the lights bright and new, half dead and hanging. Sections of ceiling blackened, others pristine. In one room the walls were scorched and equipment fused into melted lumps. In the next everything gleamed stainless steel and clean. Through it all, people ran. Nurses in old-fashioned uniforms sprinted past us, some passing straight through us like we weren't there, others slamming into us with terrifying solidity before vanishing. Orderlies pushed gurneys down intersecting halls. Doctors shouted orders that echoed without source. The whole hospital was caught in a loop of the night. It burned, playing over and over, bleeding into my present. In the chaos, a figure grabbed my arm. I spun, ready to fight, but stopped cold. My father stood there, wearing his old security uniform, the badge slightly crooked, hairline already receding, the way I remembered. His eyes were bloodshot, his face lined in ways I'd only seen in a few rare photos. "Danny," he said, relief and panic woven together. "I've been trying to reach you for so long. You weren't supposed to be in here again." The rational part of me screamed that this couldn't be real, that grief was a hell of a drug, and trauma, a good hallucination engine, but his hand on my arm was warm, solid, familiar. He smelled like coffee and cheap aftershave, and for a second I was 17 again, standing in our tiny kitchen while he shrugged on his jacket for the late shift. "Dad," I choked. Behind him, through the glass doors of an operating theater, I saw the doctor from the basement, mask back on, standing over a patient, flames licking up the walls as if someone had painted them on the air. His head snapped up, and even through the glass I knew he'd seen us. My father shook me. "Focus," he snapped, the way he used to when he was teaching me how to drive. "You don't have much time. Every time you come here, he gets stronger. And every time you fail, he spreads a little further out into whatever comes next. You almost died in the ICU loop. Did you know that? Your heart stopped once." Images slammed into me. Nightmares I'd had for years of drowning in beeping machines, of hands pushing tubes down my throat while a tall figure with empty eyes watched. I'd always written them off as anxiety dreams from the job, but now I wasn't so sure. "Why me?" I demanded, smoke stinging my eyes. Emily clung to my hand, half hidden behind my leg, watching my father with wary curiosity. "Because you were the last one we got out," he said, and his gaze flicked to Emily. Something like pride and regret warred on his face. "We saved you from the basement once. Your mother and I. You were 12. You don't remember because they wiped it, the hospital board. They erased records, sanitized everything. When the fire started that night, he tried to keep you, but I broke protocol, broke locks I wasn't supposed to touch. I got you out, but I didn't make it. Now you're a cop, and the loop pulls you back whenever he stirs. You keep answering calls that shouldn't exist." The floor trembled. A rolling wave of heat surged down the corridor, blistering my skin. "How do I stop it?" I shouted over the increasing crackle of flame. My father pointed down the hall toward a heavy steel door marked "Security Control." "You've been there before," he said. "You never make it in time. You're always too late and the loop resets. This time you've got something different." His gaze dropped to Emily. "Someone he never meant to let go." Emily looked up at me, her dark eyes strangely calm. "He can't control you when you're holding my hand," she said softly. "That's why he locked me away. I remember now. Every time you came before, he dragged you back downstairs or into the ICU, made you watch them die. But he never knew my name until you said it. You made me real again." The doctor's voice boomed over the intercom, no longer watery, but clear and delighted. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel, always trying to play hero. How many times do you think you can watch your father burn before it sticks?" Down the hall, flames burst from doorways, chasing panicked staff and patients. People fell, got up, fell again, some dissolving into ash mid-stride, while others simply flickered out like bad projections. I swallowed my terror and nodded. "Stay with me," I told Emily, and she squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. My father stepped back, already fading at the edges like smoke. "If you make it," he said, voice thick, "pull the main alarm, override. It'll cut the power to the whole building, even its little private circuits. Maybe then the fire finally ends the way it was supposed to." "What happens to you?" I asked, but he was already gone. The run to the security room felt like sprinting through a furnace. Heat licked at us from both sides, the air a shimmering wall that threatened to sear my lungs with every breath. The people around us, the echoes of that night, crashed and collided, some passing through us, others bumping and spinning away as if unsure which reality they belonged to. The doctor's laughter followed us, rising and falling with the roar of the flames. Twice the floor buckled under our feet, the world tilting. Twice I almost lost my grip on Emily, but each time she latched on harder, anchoring me in a way that felt more real than the burning chaos. We reached the security control door just as a section of ceiling collapsed behind us in a shower of sparks and burning tiles. I slammed my shoulder into the door. It held. Then I saw the key card reader, long dead, but flickering now with a feeble red light, as if powered by the same malignant energy keeping everything else alive. In previous loops, I knew, somehow, I'd probably hammered at this door until the fire took me, or until the doctor dragged me back below. This time I still had the ring of keys rattling at my belt. I dug through them with trembling fingers, until one stamped master slid into the physical lock beneath the radar. The mechanism turned with a grinding noise like old bones, and the door jerked open. Inside, the control room was a bunker of monitors and panels, walls covered in screens showing every part of the hospital. Some fed static, others showed scenes from the night of the fire on an endless loop. Nurses evacuating patients, flames crawling along ceilings, my father running down a hall with a small bundle in his arms that I now knew had been me. One monitor, right in the center, showed a live view of the lobby as I had first walked in tonight. Empty, quiet, lights flickering. Another showed the ICU as it had been minutes ago, beds full, then beds empty, the tall doctor shape turning toward the camera with those hollow eyes. At the main panel, under a series of protected switches, was a big red lever labeled System Override, Fire/Power. A safety bar was locked over it, one of those glass-covered protections you weren't supposed to break unless you wanted to shut down life support on half a building. "That's it," Emily breathed. I moved toward it, but the speaker above the panel crackled. "If you pull that," the doctor said conversationally, "you'll cut power, not just to the bad things, but to the good ones. All these lovely frozen moments, all these carefully preserved screams gone. Your father's last dash down the hallway, the way he shouted your name, you'll never see it again. Are you sure you want to lose him twice? On one of the overhead monitors, my father ran past again, in grainy black and white, clutching a small boy to his chest. Flames chased him, licking at his heels. He glanced up at the camera for a fraction of a second, eyes wide. My throat tightened. Emily tugged my sleeve. "He's lying," she said fiercely. "Your father isn't in the pictures, not really. He's stuck because the loop keeps playing. If you stop the loop, he can go wherever the rest of them went. He told me once when I was cold in my room that he wished he could make it stop." I remember now. The doctor's tone sharpened, static bristling around his words. "You're letting a child dictate the fate of an entire institution, Daniel. Think about your duty. What happens when the town finds out you murdered their history?" "My duty," I said, hand closing around the lever guard, "is to the living. And they don't know this place is still rotting under their feet." I smashed the glass, grabbed the bar, and pulled. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every monitor in the room flared white. The sound system screamed, a high, keening feedback that drove me to my knees. The building shuddered violently, as if something massive had just been yanked out of its foundations. Through the blinding light, I heard the doctor howl. It wasn't a human sound. It was metal twisting in a furnace. It was 1,000 overlapping voices suddenly cut off, mid-scream. It was the crackle of burning paper as whole histories went up in smoke. The light snapped off. The sound died. When my vision cleared, I was on my hands and knees on the dusty floor of a dead control room. The monitors were dark, cracked. Cobwebs draped the corners. The panel in front of me was rusted, the override lever frozen in the down position under a layer of grime that said no one had touched it in years. Emily's small hand was still curled in mine. "You did it," she whispered, voice small but steady. "I can't hear him anymore." My radio crackled, clear and normal for the first time since I'd arrived. "Unit 12. This is dispatch," came the familiar voice, tinged with static but gloriously ordinary. "We lost you for a bit there, status check. You still headed towards St. Augustine? We got a phantom call from the old switchboard. Probably a glitch. You can disregard if you're not nearby." I stared at my radio, then at the control room around me, then at Emily. The fire damage was old now, just black scars on concrete. The air was still heavy with dust, not smoke. The hospital was what it should have been all along, abandoned, empty. Almost empty. "Dispatch. This is 12, I said slowly. "I'm on scene at St. Augustine. I'd like backup and a forensics team. The building is supposed to be closed, but we may have some preserved evidence down here. Also, I've located a juvenile female. I'll be bringing her out." There was a pause. "Copy that. 12, dispatch said, skeptical but professional. Juvenile? From St. Augustine, you sure?" I looked at Emily. She was smiling up at me now, and for the first time her eyes looked less sunken, more like a kid's. "Yeah," I said, throat tight. "I'm sure." Getting back to the surface was easier this time. The stairwells were just stairwells, the corridors just corridors. No flames chased us. No echoes of panic played out at the edges of my vision. The ICU, when I passed it, was an empty ward full of broken beds and graffiti. The lobby was just a lobby, dusty and dim. The glass doors locked and chained from the outside as they should have been. When we stepped out into the cold night air, my cruiser sat alone in the cracked lot. Lights off. The sky above was just sky, sprinkled with stars. No unnatural clouds pressing down. Emily stopped just outside the doors and looked up at the building. They're quiet, she said almost to herself. I think they left. Who? I asked. Everyone, she replied simply. Even him. He's not stuck here anymore either. But he's not where they are. He's somewhere else. Somewhere small and dark. She pointed past me. I turned and saw, for the first time, the old incinerator chimney at the back of the property, a tall, thin stack of brick capped with rusted metal. Even from here I could see faint embers glowing inside, like the last coals of a dying fire. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup, responding to my call. What happens to you now? I asked gently. Emily looked down at her wrist. The hospital bracelet there was fading, the printed letters of her name blurring at the edges. I think I go where they went, she said. I wasn't supposed to stay. I only did because he liked how I screamed, but I am not afraid anymore. She stepped away from me, toward the edge of the lot where the cracked asphalt met overgrown grass. The night air shimmered there just slightly, like heat above a road, but the temperature was icy. Thank you, Officer Reed, she said, and for a second her voice echoed oddly, as if 100 other trapped voices were layered under it, all saying the same words. Her bracelet slipped from her wrist and fell to the ground, landing with a soft plastic smack. When I looked up, she was gone. Backup found me standing there a few minutes later, alone in front of an abandoned hospital that, as far as any of their senses could tell, was just that. No lights on, no alarms, no voices on the intercom. The official report we filed was cautious. Unauthorized interior access by unknown parties, signs of past fire damage, possible old evidence in the basement, nothing about loops in time or dead doctors or conversations with my father. But the body cam footage told a different story. When the techs pulled the video, they found hours of recording, where my shift log said I'd only been there 40 minutes. Most of it showed empty hallways, dark rooms, my flashlight beam cutting through dust. Occasionally I'd flinch or shout at something that wasn't visible on screen. Once I extended my hand to someone just out of frame and said, "Stay close, kid," to empty air. Only one thing on the footage refused to stay invisible. In the basement hallway, just before the maintenance stairs, the camera caught a brief reflection in a cracked glass panel. A girl in a hospital gown, holding my hand, her face turned toward mine. The image was glitchy, there for 3 frames only, but it was enough to freeze every tech who watched it. The brass wanted to chalk it up as a lens flare, a compression artifact, anything but what it looked like. I let them. I still visit the hills sometimes, park at the edge of the lot, and watch the dead hospital sit under the stars. The chimney is cold now, no embers, no smoke, just brick and rust. On quiet nights, if I tune my radio to the old emergency frequency, I can sometimes hear static, and underneath it, very faintly, my father's voice, not panicked this time, not shouting, just saying, "Good job, Danny," like he used to when I passed some small test as a kid. The town is planning to tear St. Augustine down next year, build condos or a shopping center. Something bright and forgetful. People argue about preserving history, about how much of the old structure to keep. Nobody asks the one person who's walked its halls while they burned and while they sat in dust. If they did, I'd tell them the truth. The hospital finally died the night a cop answered a call that never should have rung and decided to end a loop instead of surviving inside it. And somewhere, in a place I can't see, a little girl named Emily Harper isn't screaming anymore. That's the kind of ending people don't always get in real life. but it's the one I got that night on the hill. And if I have to drag myself back through that fire in nightmares for the rest of my life, to keep it that way, I will. Because when the radio crackles, with a voice that doesn't belong to the living, and asks if you'll come this time, you either ignore it and let the past keep eating itself, or you go back in with a badge, a gun, and the stubborn belief that even the worst places deserve a final, honest silence. I chose to go back in, and for once, that was enough to make the screaming finally stop.